Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 16th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the first ever 2022 generic ballot poll tracker that we have received here from FiveThirtyEight. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this today is because the Democratic Party maintains a 2.6% lead across the United States, despite Joe Biden's approval rating still remaining in the negative. And I felt that this was an interesting point that needed to be made, that the Democratic Party maintains a generic ballot point lead even when Joe Biden is unpopular. And if you take a look at the time period in which Joe Biden was popular throughout the months of May, June, and July, you will see that Democrats had a larger lead over Republicans, at times 5-6 points across the nation, largely because during that period of time, Joe Biden was approved of by roughly 8, 9, 10 points across the nation. So looking at the polling numbers in the generic ballot, in some cases, they actually did worse for the Democrats than the overall approval rating, but we cannot safely assume at all, that the approval rating and the generic ballot are going to be exactly in agreement. Right now, Democrats may have 44% of the generic ballot, but Republicans only have 41.2%. Based off the favorability rating, Joe Biden is hovering around a 46% approval, so that 44% isn't too far off, but a 49% disapproval, yet Republicans only remain at 41% in terms of overall support. And that is very substantial. The Republican Party is counting on Joe Biden's popularity to dissipate in order for them to win elections in 2022. And honestly, it makes sense. You always wait for the president to fall out of popularity in order to win elections. It worked for President Obama, it worked for President Bush, it worked for President Trump most recently, and it looks like it might work for Republicans in 2022. But based off the most recent California election results, I can't exactly say that I've seen much enthusiasm on the Republican side based off of the special elections this year. Not only was it just the recall election, but also the two Senate races in Georgia earlier on in this race. Every single House race that has occurred during this election cycle, the Republican Party hasn't shown up in heavy levels. In fact, Trump-endorsed candidates, sometimes when it's Republicans running against each other, end up losing the overall race. So the generic ballot here was meant to be an indicator for the Republican Party that they would be on track to victory. And I know what you might be thinking, just as an initial glance, that Republicans don't need to lead in the generic ballot in order to win back control of the United States House of Representatives, and you would be correct in that estimation. You would be right to say that if Democrats won the popular vote by 3 points as they do now, that they would lose control of the House of Representatives. Well, I agree with that. I do think that as it stands right now, the GOP would absolutely reclaim control of the United States House. In fact, even when Joe Biden was popular through the months of May, June, July, I consistently said that I personally believe that the Republican Party will win back control of the House of Representatives, and there will be a majority leader that is not amongst the Democratic Party, and the speaker will likely be Kevin McCarthy. So when I look at these numbers, though, I am much less confident. If I was a Republican strategist, I am much less confident in a landslide type of victory as we saw in 2010. We can actually take a look at the 2010 polling data in the generic congressional ballot, in which Republicans finished off with a 9.4% averaged lead across the nation. They ended up winning by 6.8%, but point is that Republicans absolutely decimated Democrats when it came down to the ballot box. Now, looking at the numbers now, Democrats are actually in a much better position than they were in 2010, and that's why this is so substantial. Because Democrats are still hovering around 44%, despite Joe Biden being disapproved of by around 3% across the nation, Democrats are still holding on and maintaining their lead over the GOP. And this likely will be a similar story that we will see across the United States for the foreseeable future, just considering that there are more Democrats than there are Republicans. There are more left-leaning voters than there are right-leaning voters. So all of that intertwined into our American political system, Democrats, of course, will almost always take the advantage in the generic ballot. But the reason why it would have been so substantial is because in 2010, the Republican Party won control of the House of Representatives by winning over the generic ballot by 7 percentage points. In fact, they won numerous Senate races, bringing it from 60 Democratic seats down to low 50s. So what I see in 2022, what I expect so far, is that Republicans will reclaim control of the House of Representatives. But Democrats won't be blown out in the way that they were in 2010 or the way that they were in other elections. These numbers go to show that the Democratic Party actually isn't performing at their worst at this point in time. If they were performing at their worst, the generic ballot would put the Republican Party ahead. I am honestly very surprised to see these numbers hold up so strong for the Democrats, despite Joe Biden being disapproved of. I mean, if you want to compare, let's say, for one of the largest leads for the Democrats on this map here. You have a 45.5% Democrats, 40% for Republicans, a 5-point difference here on June 26th. Well, on June 26th, 2021, Joe Biden was approved of across the nation by 11 percentage points. That translated to a 5-point victory. Now, Joe Biden is disapproved of by around 3 points, which means that the swing here is about 14 points, yet the generic ballot only swung by around 3 points in favor of the right wing. From 3 to 5, I mean, you're not talking about monumental shifts at all. If anything, it seems to be that Joe Biden's popularity isn't directly impacting the generic ballot in such a detrimental way, even though he is disapproved of at this point. And I think that is also something that certainly needs to be realized for 2022. You can see here that right leading up to the 2010 election cycle, that the Republican Party, won back control of the House, largely because President Obama was falling out of favor. On Election Day in 2010, he was hovering around a disapproved plus 5% across the nation. November 4th was disapproved plus 4.9, so the exact date I'm not entirely sure, should be hovering around there. Well, the generic ballot translated a very similar result. While the Republicans were ahead by 9.4%, they ended up winning by 6.8%. This was with President Obama falling out of favor, being disapproved of by 5 percentage points. Well, now that Joe Biden is being disapproved of by 3 percentage points, you might expect some type of Republican lead, somewhere around 5 and 6%. But the fact that Republicans don't even have a lead at this point is very monumental and does need to be pointed out, because Republicans need every single vote they can get in order to flip control back to them in the United States House of Representatives. And if they simply can't inspire voters, even in a time period in which the Democratic Party is falling out of favor, in which the issues of Afghanistan, COVID-19, and a number of other things are starting to surge back up again, that's when I question whether or not the Republican Party is truly going to take advantage of this situation, or will be as strong as they proclaim themselves to be in 2022. Because many top Republicans have already committed themselves to campaigning heavily in 2022, Donald Trump included, trying to assume and trying to perpetuate this notion that 2022 will be a red wave year. But I have yet to see any data that indicates such a claim. Any data to indicate such a claim. And when you take a look at the most recent polls in the generic ballot, the best you can see for the GOP is a 1-point lead from McConnell and Associates. The way the American electorate is set up right now makes it increasingly more difficult for the GOP to win over the national popular vote. And since the House of Representatives is ultimately decided by population, of course, there's issues of gerrymandering, the Voting Rights Act, a lot of things that are under consideration when it comes down to the House of Representatives, take that and put it to the side. The generic ballot is pretty important. The generic ballot is a very good indicator of the direction of the nation. And if Republicans can't get a lead even in their own internal polls, I question how strong this party is going to perform in 2022. It's not hard to see how they reclaim the House majority. There are 5 seats that need to be won by the GOP in order for them to reclaim the House majority. For instance, in 2018, Democrats won 40 seats. For instance, in 2010, Republicans won 63 seats. So overturns in the widest margins are absolutely possible, and in fact, are more probable than a simple 5 victory lap for the GOP when it comes down to the House of Representatives. But I do think that it is just very interesting to see that Joe Biden, despite him being underwater, Democrats maintain this advantage. And it's just something that you really wouldn't have expected or should not have expected, knowing our current political climate. Because had you told me that Joe Biden was going to hold out for such a long period of time in the disapproved, 2 weeks at this point in time, and able to ensure that Democrats are still getting a significant portion of the vote, I mean, I would have thought that that was a crazy proposition to even consider, that Joe Biden could be unpopular by such a, not large amount, but such a drastically different amount than where it was 2 months ago, and that Democrats would still maintain their way even though they were only up 5% 2 months ago. I mean, you can see here that there was a dramatic reduction, I would say, in the amount of, not dramatic reduction, a not so dramatic reduction in the amount of support that the Democratic Party has received, yet a very dramatic reduction in the amount of support that Joe Biden has received across the nation. Also questions whether or not Joe Biden's influence on the Democratic Party can actually be as negative as people hope it will be on the right wing. We know that President Obama's disapproval rating hitting the negative on Election Day certainly did not help their case in 2010. Joe Biden being disapproved of by 5 points on Election Day, or 3 points even, doesn't help their case either. But that doesn't really matter if they're still able to hold on to a significant portion of the electorate. You see, it isn't necessarily on the fault of the President of the United States, more is it just a fault on history and historical standards when it comes down to the House of Representatives and to our midterm elections. But when you see Joe Biden and when you think about the way that people view him, right now it is negative. Yet for some reason, the Democratic Party is still able to hold on to such, not a very amazing lead, but a lead nonetheless. In 2018, we also saw this impact of the presidency on the generic ballot, in which it inspired Democrats to turn up and turn out in 2018. Democrats took a 7.3% lead when it came down to the generic congressional vote. They ended up winning by 8.4%, so it wasn't too far off. In fact, it was off by just 1.1%. So when I see these new numbers, I don't necessarily say Democrats will undoubtedly win the popular vote, but I certainly think that it's likely, and I certainly think that the American public has just gotten much more left wing than they have been in the past, and are more inclined to vote for the Democratic Party. But I think that looking at the generic ballot in previous elections, that these are the indicators in which show that wave years are coming. But for the case of 2022, we have yet to see these polls indicate that Democrats are behind. It seems here, at least, that Democrats are the ones that voters want to keep in office. And if you take a look at a lot of these new polls from McConnell and Associates, Quinnipiac University, YouGov, Morning Consult, Democrats actually take the lead in every single one, despite them tying in 3 and losing in 1 by the overall final results, according to the pollsters themselves. But by the time you actually reach the analysis and you dive deep from 538, where they can actually pinpoint certain issues within the polling data itself, correct them, and release new numbers, all around, though, Democrats seem to be maintaining a lead. So despite Joe Biden falling out of favor, Democrats are persevering and truly hunkering down and expanding their potential House majority in 2022. Looking at the popularity rating of President Trump, if you want to actually go back to 2018, this was Election Day, November 6th, 2018, the disapprove and approve are 11 points apart. Yet the Republican Party still came very close to winning a number of competitive races and won a number of toss-up races. For instance, in 2020, Democrats won 0 toss-up races in the 2020 House of Representatives. So looking at 2022, there certainly is an opportunity there for the GOP looking at President Biden's approval rating, but for whatever reason, the approval rating isn't necessarily dragging down the generic ballot as it did for Donald Trump in 2018. Right now, it seems as if that this whole questioning of Joe Biden being president isn't necessarily helping Democratic voters, but it's not convincing them to move over to the GOP. I think that when voters see on the mainstream media a number of reports of claims of election fraud, when people see reports of Republicans trying to audit the election in August of 2021 after the election occurred in November of 2020. I mean, when a lot of these things start to get brought up, people tend to push themselves away from an extremist type of party, and not in a partisan way, I'm saying this, but more so just pointing it out, that it does seem that the Republican Party is that party of going out there and trying to push these false narratives that, certain elections are rigged, certain X, Y's, and Z's are happening because of A, B, and C, whatever it might be. A lot of these situations that the Republican Party is displaying through campaign ads and through candidates are completely inaccurate, and many of them are doubling down on the big lie that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen from President Trump, which can also attribute to the reason why Democrats seem to have such a strong following. America has gotten much more divisive over the past couple of years. Donald Trump has completely revolutionized our understanding of American politics, for better or for worse. But it really doesn't matter when it comes down to a number of things that we know besides what Donald Trump has impacted. When it comes down to the generic ballot, we know what that says and what that means for the House, for the Senate. When you take a look at state retirements, you know what that means for the House and for the Senate. But the thing is, when you see the clear correlation and dip in support for Republicans along with Donald Trump falling out of favor, yet a completely different reaction amongst Democrats and voters who supported Joe Biden, voted for him, and approved of him for a brief period of time, and they still see that Democrats are ahead, that also might be just an indicator that Democrats have a bit more support and are putting in a bit more effort, I would say, into this race. Because 2022, while is right around the corner, I do think that the Democratic Party is going to be playing heavy defense and certainly has been putting out ads and been putting out a lot of energy into the race in order to ensure that stuff like this does not change. To ensure that even when Biden may be falling out of favor, the Democrats do not. you're talking about a 2-point shift from July to September, while I'm talking about a 14-point shift in the approval rating from July to September. And yet the Democratic Party still seems to hold on strong. All around here, I think that the Democratic Party just has that advantage because of the sheer amount of people that support the Democratic Party more than Republicans. But I do think that once Republicans, or if they do end up taking the lead, that will be very monumental. But for right now, I think Democrats should not necessarily relish in this victory and become complacent, but certainly appreciate it and continue on to push and expand this generic ballot lead if they are to continue to be extremely competitive for 2022 and potentially might be able to retain one chamber of Congress, potentially two. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2021 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.